When I bought my farm 3 years ago, I thought I'd finally found my tranquil escape. No neighbors, no noise, no conflict. Just me, the open land, and a small rustic house I'd been dreaming of restoring. The property was everything I desired. A few acres of rolling fields, a tree line at the back, and an old locked gate at the entrance. It was simple, secluded, and mine. But then the homeowner association president from the neighborhood next door, Karen, as I'll call her, appeared. At first, I thought she was just being courteous. She introduced herself the day I was unloading the last of my moving boxes, giving me that overly enthusiastic smile that always feels just a little too forced. Karen explained that she was the president of the homeowner association from the nearby subdivision. She pointed vaguely toward the rows of identical homes about half a mile away and said something about how we like to keep the neighborhood appearing nice. I didn't think much of it. I smiled, nodded, and told her I was not part of the homeowner association since my property wasn't within their limits. She laughed almost awkwardly and said, "Oh, of course not. But you know, it's always good to be a respectful neighbor." That phrase would come up again later, and it would send chills down my spine. But at the time, I dismissed it as small talk and went back to unpacking. A few weeks later, Karen returned. This time I was outside repairing the old gate. It's a heavy metal gate that swings across my driveway, and it had corroded over the years. It wasn't much to look at, but it did its job keeping the property secure and giving me some much-needed seclusion. I had just finished painting it when I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. Karen was standing there smiling again, holding a plate of cookies. "I thought I'd bring you these," she said, handing them over. "Just a small welcome gift." I thanked her, and we conversed for a minute. Then casually, she gestured toward the gate. "You know," she said, "some of the folks in our neighborhood were wondering why it's locked. It's such a pity to keep such a beautiful piece of land all closed off like that." I raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's my private property," I said. "I enjoy having my space." Her smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered swiftly. "Oh, of course, of course. I just meant that it's such a scenic area. It's the kind of place people would love to take a walk or admire the view, you know, as good neighbors." There it was again. Good neighbors. I laughed politely and said something vague about preferring my privacy. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't satisfied with my answer. Before she left, she added, "You know, if you ever want to make enhancements to the property, the homeowner association has resources. We're always here to assist." I didn't think much of it at the time. Karen was a little assertive, sure, but I figured that was just her nature. I didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. A few months went by. Without trouble, I spent my days working on the farm, fixing up the house, and relishing the quiet. Then one evening I noticed something unusual on my security camera. The camera, mounted near the gate, showed Karen standing outside the entrance with a clipboard. She wasn't doing anything, just standing there, gazing at the gate, jotting something down, and occasionally glancing around as if to make sure no one was observing. It was peculiar, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was documenting something for the homeowner association. I figured it wasn't worth stressing over. That changed the following weekend. I was out back clearing some brush near the tree line when I heard voices. At first, I thought they were coming from the road, but when I walked closer to the fence, I saw two people, strangers, inside my property. They were strolling along the edge of the field, pointing at things and chatting like they were on a guided tour. "Excuse me," called out, walking toward them. They jumped, clearly startled, and began stammering apologies. One of them, a woman in her 40s, said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Karen said it would be fine. "She told us you wouldn't mind if we took a quick walk around." I stared at her, astonished. Karen said what? She said this was part of the neighborhood and that it's open to residents, the woman explained. "We just wanted to take a look." I was furious, but managed to keep my composure. "This is private property," I said firmly. "Karen doesn't have any jurisdiction here. Please leave." They apologized again and hurried off, but I was left with more questions than answers. Why would Karen tell people my property was part of the neighborhood? Was this some kind of mistake, or was she trying to manipulate something? The next day, I decided to confront her. I walked over to the homeowner association office in the neighborhood and asked to speak with Karen. She greeted me with her usual grin, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, unease, maybe, when I mentioned the trespassers. "Oh, that must have been a mix-up," she said quickly. "I might have mentioned your property in passing, but I never told anyone they could go in." I didn't believe it. Her tone was too dismissive to rehearse, but without proof, there wasn't much I could do, so I let it go before I left. Though she added, "You know, if you ever want to join the homeowner association, we'd be happy to have you. It would make things so much simpler for everyone." That's when I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Karen wasn't just intrusive. She was trying to bring my property under homeowner association control. And I had a dreadful feeling that this was only the beginning. That week, I installed more security cameras around the property. If Karen or her homeowner association followers were going to keep pushing, I wanted to be prepared. Sure enough, the cameras caught her at the gate again a few nights later, taking more photos and scribbling notes. And then a letter arrived. It was from the homeowner association. The first line read, "We've noticed that your property is not currently in compliance with homeowner association guidelines." Compliance? I wasn't even part of the homeowner association. It started with an envelope on my doorstep. At first, I thought it was another homeowner association letter, so I nearly discarded it without opening it. But something about it felt strange. There was no official homeowner association letterhead this time, just my name scrawled on the front. Inside was a single typed page. It read, "We, the members of neighborhood name homeowner association, respectfully request that you reconsider your stance on allowing limited community access to your property. Such access would greatly benefit the neighborhood, encourage goodwill, and align with the aesthetic and recreational goals of the community." There was a signature at the bottom, Karen's, and below her name a long list of other homeowner association members' names and signatures. This wasn't a letter, it was a petition. I'll admit part of me laughed at the sheer boldness. My private property wasn't a public park, and I couldn't believe they thought a petition would persuade me otherwise. But another part of me was pissed. This wasn't just Karen anymore. It seemed like she'd roped half the neighborhood into her scheme. I started asking myself questions. Why were they so fixated on my property? What was Karen telling these people to get them to sign this thing? And what exactly did they mean by limited access? I decided it was time to get some answers. I went straight to Karen's house. When she opened the door, she didn't look shocked to see me. If anything, she looked triumphant. "Oh, hi there," she said, in that same overly sugary tone she always used. I didn't bother with formalities. I held up the petition and said, "Care to explain this?" Karen glanced at it and shrugged. "Oh, that. It's just something a few of the neighbors wanted to do. No major issue." "No major issue?" I repeated. "You're trying to pressure me into opening my land to your neighborhood like it's some kind of public park. That's a major issue." Karen's smile faded for the briefest second before she recovered. "It's not coercion," she said. "It's just encouragement. The neighborhood really admires your property, and we think it would be a wonderful enhancement to the community." "It's not part of the community," I shot back. "It's private property, and it's staying that way." Karen's smile vanished completely. This time, she crossed her arms and said, "Well, I'm just trying to be a good neighbor. But if that's how you feel, guess there's nothing more to talk about." It was such a dismissive response that I almost walked away right then and there. But something about the way she said it, like she already had another plan in mind, made me pause. Instead of leaving, decided to challenge her. "Why are you so obsessed with my property, Karen?" I asked. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "I'm not. I mean, we're not. It's just a lot of people feel like it would benefit the community, that's all." Her answer didn't sit right with me, but I knew I wasn't going to get anything else out of her, so I left the next day. Started noticing suspicious things around my property. First, I found a pile of garbage cans, wrappers, even a pair of old sneakers dumped just inside the tree line. I thought maybe some kids had wandered onto the property and left it there, but the cameras didn't show anyone. Then 2 days later, I noticed tire tracks near the back gate that hadn't been there before. Again, the cameras didn't show anything, but it was clear someone had driven back there. And then the real shocker. One of my crops, a row of tomatoes I'd been growing, was completely crushed. At first, I thought maybe deer had gotten in, but there were no hoofprints, just flattened plants and soil, like someone had walked straight through it. I was enraged, but more than that, I was uneasy. It felt like someone was trying to send a warning, and I had a pretty good idea who it was. The final straw came a week later. I was walking the property, checking the perimeter, when I spotted something gleaming in the dirt near the back fence. It was a piece of paper, wet and muddy, but still readable. It was another letter from the homeowner association. This one was different from the petition. It was an official notice, complete with letterhead and legal terminology, stating that my fence was in violation of community regulations and encroaching on homeowner association land. The letter demanded that I remove the fence immediately or face further consequences. I couldn't believe it. Not only was my property not part of the homeowner association, but I'd checked the property lines. When I first bought the place, my fence was well within my boundaries. I knew Karen had to be behind this, but now she was dragging the entire homeowner association into it. This wasn't just a petty power move anymore. It was a full-scale attack. I decided to fight back first. I hired a surveyor to recheck the property lines. As expected, the results showed that my fence wasn't intruding on anything. In fact, it revealed something even more surprising. A small strip of homeowner association landscaping, a row of bushes, and a decorative sign was actually on my property. Armed with this new information, contacted a real estate attorney. He drafted a formal response to the homeowner association, demanding they cease all harassment immediately and remove their landscaping from my property. Meanwhile, I reinforced my security system. I added more cameras, installed motion-activated lights, and even put up a few no trespassing signs just to make things extra obvious. For a few weeks, things were peaceful. I didn't see Karen, and there were no new letters or unusual incidents. I started to think maybe she'd finally given up. But then one night, I caught her on camera again. This time, she wasn't alone. She was with two other people, and they were standing just outside the gate, pointing and discussing. One of them had a measuring tape, and the other was holding what appeared to be blueprints. The footage sent chills down my spine. What the hell was Karen plotting now? It all started to unravel the next morning when I decided to call the homeowner association lawyer who'd sent me that absurd compliance violation letter. I wasn't expecting much. Probably some vague legal talk about community standards and misunderstandings. But what I got instead was the first real crack. In Karen's schemes, the lawyer sounded almost hesitant. When I mentioned the letter, he hesitated for a moment before finally admitting we were under the assumption that your property was part of the homeowner association jurisdiction. Under the assumption, I said, trying not to laugh. You didn't even verify. Well, Mrs. Karen, the homeowner association president provided documentation suggesting that the property fell within homeowner association boundaries. If that's incorrect, we'd be happy to reassess. Stop right there, I interrupted. What documentation? There was a long silence before he finally confessed. She said there were plans to incorporate the property into the homeowner association. Incorporate my property? I hung up and immediately called my attorney. This wasn't just Karen being intrusive or overstepping her limits. This was a calculated attempt to seize my land as part of the homeowner association. But here's the twist. Annexing property isn't something a homeowner association can just decide. To do it requires city authorization, legal procedures, and most importantly, the owner's consent, none of which Karen had. Fueled by equal parts outrage and determination, I decided to investigate further. I reached out to a friend who works in local government, zoning, and land use. Within hours, she sent me a file that nearly made my jaw drop. Apparently, Karen had submitted a request months ago to the city council to incorporate my property into the homeowner association, claiming it was neglected and beneficial to the community if it were controlled under their regulations. She had included photos of my farm taken without my permission and a list of complaints from supposed neighbors about my property being an eyesore and a disturbance. The lies were infuriating. My farm wasn't just well maintained, it was flourishing. And as for the complaints, I'd never heard a word from any neighbors. And based on the petition fiasco, it seemed like Karen was the one fabricating problems. I knew I needed to act swiftly. Karen's request was set to be reviewed by the city council in just 2 weeks. If they approved it, I'd be dragged into homeowner association hell, forced to comply with their ridiculous regulations and potentially lose control of how I managed my own land. So I did what Karen never anticipated. I went public. I started by printing copies of the surveyor report that showed my fence was within my property lines, and amusingly, how the homeowner association's landscaping was actually on my land. Then I added screenshots from my security cameras of Karen trespassing, taking pictures, and bringing people onto my property without my authorization. I even included a copy of her petition and a timeline of all the incidents, from the intruders to the letter claiming infractions. I posted everything online, tagging the local neighborhood groups, city council members, and even the homeowner association's own social media page. The title, "The Homeowner Association President Who Tried to Steal My Farm." The response was overwhelming. Neighbors I'd never even met reached out to apologize for Karen's actions, saying they had no idea she was pulling this kind of scheme. A few even told me they'd felt pressured into signing the petition, thinking it was just a formality. But the real chaos started when Karen's own homeowner association board got wind of what was happening. Apparently, Karen had been keeping her plans concealed even from them, claiming she was handling a difficult homeowner situation. When they saw the evidence I'd posted, several board members immediately contacted me to separate themselves from her. One of them, a middle-aged guy named Dave, confided in me that Karen had been using homeowner association funds to pay for the attorney and the landscaping near my property. She said it was for the benefit of the neighborhood, he told me, shaking his head. But now it looks like she was just trying to seize your land. With the homeowner association board turning against her, and the city council bombarded with complaints from outraged neighbors, Karen's influence was collapsing. But she wasn't finished yet. The night before the council hearing, my cameras caught her again. This time, she was attempting to remove the no trespassing signs I'd posted. She had a pair of bolt cutters in one hand and a flashlight in the other. I called the sheriff immediately. When they arrived, Karen tried to play the victim, claiming she was just inspecting the property lines. But the deputies weren't fooled. They reviewed the camera footage, saw her trespassing, and issued her a citation. She looked absolutely enraged as they escorted her off my land. The city council hearing was the final nail in the coffin. Armed with my proof, my attorney and I presented a strong case showing that Karen's annexation request was based on fabricated claims and unauthorized actions. Several neighbors even appeared to speak on my behalf, condemning Karen's actions and demanding accountability. The council unanimously voted to reject the request. Not only that, but they initiated an investigation into Karen's conduct, especially her misappropriation of homeowner association funds. In the weeks that followed, Karen resigned as homeowner association president under growing pressure from both the board and the neighborhood. Her attorney dropped her as a client, and the landscaping she'd placed on my property was discreetly removed. As for me, I finally got the peace and solitude I'd been hoping for when I moved to the farm. The homeowner association hasn't troubled me since, and I've made a few new friends among the neighbors who were just as frustrated with Karen as I was.